I am Tina Marie J, and I am here with another podcast video for you guys. I'm so excited. I have Katie here with us for this video. She's going to tell us a little bit about her experience as an ex-member of the ICOC. Hey, Katie, how are you doing?
Hi, doing great.
So you were a part of the ICOC for how long?
So I was a what they would call a kingdom kid. So I was pretty much raised in it as a kid, but I was technically a disciple for 2 years.
How did you join this church?
So it's super interesting. I kind of actually like this story. It's really weird, but because I believe God was trying to bring my family to know Him. But my mom, when she was, I think we were like 3, we were really young. She literally walked into an IHOP and ran into some members, and she saw that they were studying the Bible, and she was just curious, and pretty much she goes up and asks them, what are you guys reading? What are you studying? And they ended up studying with her. She got baptized like not too long after that, as well as my dad. And then for the most part, growing up, we were a part of the church, even though we lived in a small town. The closest like big congregation was 2 hours away. So we visit them like on a monthly basis. And then for me, when I really got into the church, I think, I just graduated high school. I knew a lot of the college leaders. My sister had already joined the church. And so I moved out there because my dad kind of pushed me to move out there just to be a part of the church, be closer to like the bigger branch of the church. So I moved out there for college, and I started studying with one of the college leaders. And like a month or two later, I became a disciple.
How did you feel when you first started going to this church? What was your experience like in the beginning?
So it was, I really didn't get the full brunt of, I mean, what I would consider the whole cultish part until I moved there. The first thing that I thought was really alarming was I was friends with one of the girls who was a disciple at the time. She's actually left since then, but she said like I could live in her house because I didn't have anywhere to live. I mean, I didn't have my own apartment or anything. So she was like, yeah, just come move in with me. You're probably going to study the Bible and become a disciple anyway, so it's totally cool. And I got a lot of backlash for that. They were really against it because I wasn't a disciple yet, and how like it was just like this weird like, oh, we only allow sisters to live with sisters and we don't want you to like influence them. And ironically enough, that girl left, her and her sister actually left the church before I did. So I don't think I had anything to do with it. But but yeah, so that was kind of my first experience where I was like that's weird. Why are you guys controlling that? So that was really interesting. The other thing was growing up, like I knew I wanted to be baptized. That was always like a big deal. I was kind of a part of the teen ministry for a bit, so I kind of had an idea of what it was like to be a disciple, what it meant to be a disciple. And it was almost like the cool kids club. Like as a teenager, I wanted to be baptized as a teenager, but I was not spiritual enough to be baptized as a teenager. But it really felt like it was a cliquish kind of club thing. Like you couldn't go on dates unless you were a disciple, and you couldn't do certain things with other members unless you were a disciple. You couldn't take the communion, all that different stuff. And so I was just kind of like, oh, like it almost like being in my position, I was like, oh, I really, really, really want to be a disciple so I can do all these cool things. Like not because I want to follow God, but because I want to be in the cool kids club. So I feel like it was very much something romanticized to be baptized, to be a part of that. And yeah, and it was like you had all these perks. And so I don't know, I felt like once I got past that, then I would be a better person or something. So,
How long ago did you leave?
so I would have left. It was November of 2016. It feels like yesterday, but yeah, it was almost 2 years ago now.
How do you feel now that you're not there anymore?
I think I've experienced a whirlwind of emotions when I first left. I was pretty much convinced I would probably go into hell. I almost wanted to prove myself that I was still a disciple because I was always told, like, if you leave the church, you're leaving God. And Like you don't like, yeah, you're giving up on God and everything. You don't have a relationship with God because, we're the one true church. And so when I first left, I was like convinced I was going to find another church that was going to be just as good as them. And I was going to get myself like ingrained in it and make new friends. And it was almost like I wanted to prove myself. And it was really miserable, honestly. I feel like it's only been a year since I've stopped, or since I started working on that mentality and not trying to, I don't need to prove myself kind of thing. So now, I mean, it's been a lot better since I've left. But at first, I know I was definitely like all over the place. My parents had to constantly remind me that like I'm not going to hell because I've left, and that there's so much more to God than just this church. And it was really crazy at the beginning there.
Yeah, that's something that a lot of people go through. I went through that exact same thing, and I was also told when I left that I was disappointing God and that I
Hmm.
would go to hell because I needed to be a part of their church. Specifically,
Yeah.
this has to be the church that you have to be a part of and your family has to be a part of, or else everyone is going to hell. And that's something that's really hard to get out of your mind once it's been ingrained. So I can only imagine how it was for you, since you were actually a kingdom kid.
Oh
So
yeah.
must have been taught so many things. What age did you start going to this church?
It was pretty, I want to say around 5 is when I can remember. I think my parents were baptized in like 1998, so I was like 3 then. And but it was really interesting. The church, as a lot of people know, went through some split of sorts. There was the whole Kit McKean thing that a lot of people know about. There's a lot of changes going on. My parents actually left the church at some point and started going to a local church for like maybe 6 months to a year, and then they didn't like that church, so they went back and thought that the ICOC had changed, and they kind of changed but not really. And then so I just remember like a little part of my childhood going to one other church, but for the most part, from I want to say 5 years old to, I guess I was 20, yeah, to 21 at the time.
How I'm curious, how was it as a kingdom kid? Like how was having friendships? Did you have friends outside of the church, or were you personally encouraged? Oh, I don't want to use the word encourage. I almost accidentally I almost used it. I don't want to say it. Were
Oh my gosh.
you told that you should have play dates with kids within the church? And because I know for me, when I was a member and my kids were a part of the kingdom kid, I was always told I should have play dates. People were always asking me if I want to do play date with the kids, if I want to do this, I want to do that. They constantly wanted to have our kids hang out, which I was fine with, but I don't really know much about what life is like as a kingdom kid when it comes to being social.
Yeah, so it's kind of a different story for me. I mean, I know the majority of my friends who were Kingdom kids, even through college and everything, had a little bit different, kind of similar to what you're explaining. But for me, since I was in a small town, I know that there was only like 20 of us in our little house church that we had. So I kind of grew up with a few other Kingdom kids, so to speak, and those girls are still in the church this day. They ended up actually moving back to the big city at some point when they were like in high school with their family. But at one point, we were all together, and since it was a house church, for the most part, the most that I got as like a child, not necessarily high school, I'll get into that in a second, but for like as a child, it was pretty much like my mom would set up those cute little what do they call, they're like stories that you read in the Old Testament, the children's stories, so to speak. We would do like just simple coloring stuff. There was nothing too crazy, but that's just because we were small. Like I wasn't really encouraged. Going into high school though, I mean, I went to a normal public school. I was actually heavily influenced in what the ICOC would call the world, because I didn't have any high school, I guess, age church members near me since I was in a small town. I did know of the a good handful, a good chunk of them from the city. And I would go once like once a month kind of thing and visit a few of them and kind of talk to them. But for the most part, like I was not a good girl, I would say. In high school, I was very rebellious. And so I knew what was expected of me. And I was talked to a lot by the teen ministry leaders about, my actions and the things I was getting into. But it was really hard for them to keep an eye on me because I was just so far away, and it was kind of really up to me to hold myself accountable, which is kind of nice. But I mean, for the most part, I knew though all the stories. I knew that I had to be baptized. I knew like all of the things you have to know, like to be a disciple and whatnot growing up. That was just kind of taught by my parents, which I'm really thankful for. I didn't have too many like insane influences going on, but I would attend all of the teen camps. I would attend all of the high school little trips that we would go on into like California or something. We'd visit the West Coast and whatnot. So I had some friends there, but for the most part, it wasn't until college that I really like, those were my only friends for the most part.
I'm interested to know, you said that you were rebellious. If you don't mind sharing that part, like in what ways were you rebellious?
So, I mean, I am personally just like a really open person. I mean, as far as boys go, I was very much involved in like a handful of relationships in high school that were everything far from pure, I will say. I just didn't tell anyone what I was up to. So I definitely had to, write that down in my sin list and whatnot. But I was not really, I guess, monitored in high school. So I drank a lot. I will say that I was pretty much an alcoholic. My own family had a lot of issues that they're totally open to sharing and whatnot to this day because they've gone through so much and they're so much better now. But in high school, it was really rough. I grew up with, parents who were law enforcement. It was a really interesting childhood. So I drank a lot. My dad had alcohol that he was constantly trying to hide from me, but I somehow got my hands on. So I drank literally in the high schools. I don't know how I never got caught, but I was super depressed. I was just always doing things for people to like me. I'm lucky that I, didn't have to deal with teen pregnancy like a lot of the girls in my high school, but I definitely feel like God was, even though I was doing a lot of bad things, God was definitely protecting my life and my future for the most part.
You basically were a normal teenage girl who was
Oh
just
yeah, for sure.
thing. And did the ICOC ever say that you were rebellious? Did they ever call you rebellious?
No, not from the, I mean, I'm thinking of one particular, one of the leaders who was most involved from my teenage years to my college years up until when I left. And she, was, oh man, I gave her a run for her money because I was constantly questioning everything that they called me out on. I wasn't a good girl though. So, I mean, I can think of the girls who were the good girls, and I don't feel like I was one of them because maybe I looked like a good girl half the time, but secretly I was doing something I wasn't supposed to be. And then eventually I would tell them what I was doing. So I don't know if I was I was rebellious in my own eyes, but I feel like for the most part, I was just deceitful and lying and kind of living a double life half the time as a disciple.
Yeah, I could definitely relate to that because I think for a lot of the time that I was a disciple, I felt like I was living a double life. And
Yeah.
I was definitely called rebellious. I didn't feel like I was rebellious, but if I just asked a question that was not supposed to be asked, and all of a sudden I was
Mm-hmm.
rebellious and all of those things. I'm curious, exactly how did the church handle things with you when you were going through those moments in your life as a teenager?
Oh my gosh. I was actually just telling my mom this really weird story that she didn't know about. But pretty much when I was a disciple, I think I was maybe a year as a disciple, and there was this guy that whose family was in the church. He wasn't in the church, but his whole family, the rest of them were all heavily involved in the church. And he was like super, I guess, rebellious like me, doing his own thing. Doesn't really believe in God. But anyway, we were dating. We dated in high school. We were like seeing each other, so to speak, in college. And I was always sneaking over to this coffee shop at like midnight. I lived with, other disciples, and I would sneak over to this coffee shop and I would literally just chit chat with him all night, just to hang out. We were best friends, I guess you could say. And at one point, though, I did actually live with empty nesters while I was a disciple, and they would just leave me pretty much by myself when they would go on vacations and stuff, and just leave me to have the whole house. And one time I invited the guy over to hang out with me, and we did things that were not very questionable disciple like behavior. we did not sleep with each other, I will say that. But yeah, we did some questionable things that they would totally not. I mean, he shouldn't have been there to begin with. But eventually I felt guilty about the whole thing, and I told my discipler, and she was in complete and total shock. And I didn't think that I was going to I would get in trouble myself, but it was this weird situation where she felt like I should have told his mom what I'd done. And she was like, yeah, you need to go and you need to pull his mom aside. You need to tell his mom everything you did. And I'm like, okay, this guy is an adult. We're both over 18. He lives his own life. Like, his parent, I love his parents because they respect their kids, whatever they want to believe, they're not going to force it on them. But she was like, yeah, you need to pull her aside and you need to tell her what you did. And I'm like, well, that's embarrassing. Like, this is going to be a real awkward conversation. And I did it anyway. And this goes to show that I really love this woman, but she just kind of like, almost like, not laughed at me, the mom, but she was like, oh, like, it's weird that you're telling me, but like, thanks for telling me. Like, I understand, as a young adult, like, people make mistakes and everything, and people, do things and whatnot. She's like, I'm really glad you told me. She's like, it's totally cool. Like, don't sweat or anything. And I'm like, what? Why did I just put myself through that? And yeah, I shared that story with my mom, and I was like, oh my gosh. She goes, that must have backfired in her face, because like, I don't know what she was expecting to come of that conversation, but like, the woman was totally cool with the whole thing for the most part. I mean, she, obviously doesn't want me, being a floozy or anything, but she was like not overwhelmed. She didn't feel like I was going to hell. And so it was just a really weird situation. And I'm like, why did she make me go and tell his mom? Like, that's so strange. And she said like that I couldn't be forgiven by God pretty much if I didn't tell her. And I didn't repent of it and everything. Yeah, so I was like, that's weird, but okay.
That really reminds me of the time when I was doing restoration studies, because apparently I wasn't good enough for God at that moment, so I needed to be restored even though I was baptized.
Yeah.
The women that I had done my restoration studies with, well, one of the women that I was doing it with was also my discipling partner, and she also studied. No, she didn't study with me. It was someone else. But she was my discipling partner. And she told me that I needed to write an apology or verbally apologize to my father-in-law because we didn't get along. And that if I didn't do it, then I couldn't be restored and I wouldn't be forgiven by God, and I could possibly go to hell. So that's what that reminds me of, the lies that these people tell. And when you really think about it and see how many people are told things like this, there's no wonder why so many people leave traumatized.
Oh yeah,
Everything
for sure.
is hell and fear-based. So it just makes sense that people would leave and fear for their life. A lot of people stay because they're fearful of going to hell and fearful of being a disappointment to God. And a lot of people leave and still feel the fear. How did you handle that fear when you left?
No, you're totally right about that whole fear. When I first left, it was really hard because I felt like God wanted me to leave at first. And so when I made that decision, like, I had prayed about it, and like, not like I was always taught to pray, but I prayed about it like we had our thing, me and God, and I was like, you know what? you got to tell me like when it's time to go. And it was the weirdest time when I actually did leave. And when I left though, all these things, like negative things that the church was throwing at me it's almost like they wanted to scare me into coming back kind of thing.
Right.
And at first I felt like, I was like, God, like I feel like you wanted me to leave. Like, why is all of this happening? Like, I'm literally getting kicked out of my apartment at some point. I don't have anywhere to live. I don't know what I'm doing because, all of my friends were in this church and it was super overwhelming. And I felt like in the end, like God literally provided everything for me. And it blew my mind because at first I'm like, well, clearly I made the wrong decision. And I was debating going back. But it was just like, if I just waited long enough, and then I was like, bro, I got you. But yeah, it was very scary because I was told that I was leaving the herd. I was told not to talk to anyone about anything that I knew because they wanted to protect the flock. And it kind of made me feel like, I'm like, well, I must not be a part of the flock because you're not trying really hard to get me back. And it was just this crazy feeling. And when I think back on it, because I know a lot of people who have left and they leave God, they do legitimately leave God. And my theory on this is a lot of people think and have been told that God is here in this church. And so if you've left this church, you've left God. And you're convinced that, like, well, I don't want to be in that church because that church is horrible to me and they treat me this way. And so if, I leave that church, I leave God, and I don't want God if God is in that church. And so when I realized that, I was like, well, I don't think God's in that church. And I was like, because I think God dragged me out of that church at some point. And so my whole thing is I hope other people see that God isn't in that church. And it's a hard pill to swallow, but I don't honestly believe that God is truly, working in that church.
That is what a lot of people do think. They do believe that God is in that one church, like as if God can only be in one place.
Right.
And I mean, it's really frustrating when you're a member, whether you've been a member for 7 years or for ever since you were 5, like you have been. It's very frustrating when you're a member of a church that you trust and you know and you love and you defend, but at the same time you see that there is just something that is off about them and just doesn't sit well with you, and you want to leave, but you're constantly told you're leaving God all the time.
Oh, yeah.
You're leaving God, you're gonna leave God, you're not a real Christian, you're not a true disciple. That's very frustrating. And for me, that was my biggest thing. I remember when I had left and I told my discipler, I specifically these words, I told her, I'm leaving the church and I'm taking God with me. That was what I said.
That's awesome.
Yeah. And I'm not sure if you know, but I've mentioned in the videos, I'm not a Christian anymore. A lot of my beliefs have changed, but I respect everyone's beliefs, and at that time I truly felt that way. And I say that even for whoever's listening now who does believe in God, whatever you believe and you feel that's inside, you take that with you. It's the ICOC is not some special place that everyone has to be a part of. And if you're not a part of this special place, then you're no longer special. That is ridiculous. It's a building that people rent. They never have their own church person.
Right.
Or a school that they rent out, and they call it a church, and they put a whole bunch of mixed, screwed up messages in your mind and make you believe that you're not enough, or that you will never be enough, or that God is not happy with you. You constantly have to put in work just to be good enough, even though the Bible says that works aren't everything. It's how it explains to you, it's not all about the works, but they go with a lot of works. So I'm happy that you mentioned that, because that's something that a lot of people do need to understand. And like you said, it's a hard pill to swallow, but people have to just kind of finally get to that point where they can say, you know what, I have to just take the dive and leave. and just trust within myself that this is not where I'm meant to be, and this is
Mm-hmm.
not the end all for everything.
I totally agree.
How did your friends in the church respond to you leaving? Did they continue talking to you, or did they cut you off?
Oh man. So I will say, as of now, my roommates, at least for the most part, we're not, I wouldn't say we're friends, but I guess I don't hate them anymore. And I've come to forgiveness with them. But my roommates were probably the closest people. I only lived in two households with single women, and then I lived in an empty nester's house at one point. But one of my closest best friends from the start, she left before I did. That was like super hard because she was the only person that was so real with me. And I actually love that she left because she was constantly questioning things all the time. And that's why she left, because she was like, no, you guys can't give me a straight answer. But my roommates, anyway, they were super close to me. We all loved music. We all had a lot of common interests. And my parents had left 6 months before me. So I was really, really questioning things for a solid 6 months. Just going back and forth of like, well, because I trust my parents and I trusted their faith. And I was always asking them questions about stuff. And I felt like, God was egging me on to go. So when I did finally leave, I left. I actually told the leaders that I was leaving one random midweek, and I came home that night and I told my roommates, because obviously I live with them, and I was like, hey, just want to let you guys know this is where it's at. And at first they were super cool. They were like, okay, yeah, that's totally fine. Like, that's what you want to do. We're not really going to deal with it just yet, because I don't think they even knew how to deal with that.
Right.
And so it was pretty cool for, I think, a month. And then a month goes by and they all sit me down at the table one day. And at this point, I'm not showing up to midweeks, obviously. I'm not going to the Friday thing. I'm not going to all the stuff that they're making me go to. Not going to their church. I'm doing my own thing in life, working. I'm not bringing boys home. I'm not, causing any, issues. But they all sit me down one night and they whip out the Bible, and they literally picked out this scripture that I feel like I'll never forget because it's just so outrageous. And I want to be able to find it. But pretty much they sat me down. They're like, hey, so we got advice. I hate advice at this point.
Yeah.
But they're like, we got advice and we, have thought it over, and we didn't really get advice at first. So that's, on our fault. That's like our problem. And we're sorry for not getting advice originally. But they were like, yeah, we just all want to go around and share how we feel about you living with us and not being a part of this church. And I was like, oh, great. This is glorious. And so they all go around sharing their feelings and everything, and just kind of their concern. And I voiced to them that I was questioning their doctrine. That's why I left. I let them know that I'm like, hey, I don't believe in some of the things you believe. And I would personally say myself that I don't consider myself a Christian either at this point. I do believe in God and I do believe in Jesus, but I would not consider myself a Christian. There's some things I just don't agree with. And so with that, they were like, well, we don't feel like, we're on the same page, and it's just not good for you to be here since we're not together. And they use this scripture in Matthew. And it talks about, literally, I'll quote it for word. It says, a household divided will not stand. And I was like, what? Literally just that scripture. It wasn't even the whole story behind it. It was in the New Testament, and it was Jesus talking about how, like, everyone couldn't decide who he was. They were asking, they're like, hey, who do you say I am? No, well, some say you're this, some say you're that. And that's the actual story about it. So he's like, okay, well, you guys need to figure out who I am as a unit, because a household divided will not stand. They didn't read that whole thing. They literally just read the one scripture, and they said, yeah, so we're a household and we're divided because you believe this and we believe this. And so, we won't stand. We don't feel like, you should be here because you're just going to divide our house, essentially. And I was like, are you for reals? And so I actually read them the whole scripture. I'm like, I'm going to tell you right now, I don't think that that's what it means.
Right.
But at that point, they're like, so pretty much we want you to leave. And so I was like, well, Well, as far as the law goes, and technically, you actually can't kick me out because I could easily sue for prejudice, essentially. And I told him that because like, I just want you to know, like, that you're at risk for that if you push me to leave. But after the whole conversation, I was like, why would I want to live with people who don't want to live with me? Like, who pretty much can't stand my presence in their house. And that hurt so bad because I was like, wow, simply because I left your church, like, we are no longer friends. You do not care for me. You do not love me. You would rather see me be anywhere but in your house, even if that meant I was homeless, even if that meant anything. And they were even trying to give me a date on which I could leave. And I straight up put a stance, was like, no, I will leave when I'm ready to leave. And you're not going to like push me. And one of the girls even was like, oh, it was right before the holiday. And she was like, oh, don't worry about getting us gifts. You know, we want you to save your money so you can leave. And I was like,
Wow.
wow. Yeah, I was like, okay. So, yeah, it took me like 2 months after that god awful conversation I made connections with one of my dad's best friends, random family members who are actually super cool people, as it turns out. But I ended up living with them. They had a guest house, and I moved into there pretty shortly after. And once I moved out, it was just pretty much cut all ties for the most part. I got a bunch of phone calls from other girls who weren't in my house who found out that I was leaving. Well, not a bunch. I would say like 2 or 3 who actually kind of cared about me. And they were crying, and like, it was almost like I was hurting them. Like, they were like, oh, why are you leaving? Like, that hurts me so much. Like, you know, like, I love you. Like, this is not right. And I feel like, you know, you're not making the right decision. And it was like, oh, I put all this effort into you, and I like put all this time into you. And I'm like, what does that have to do with, like, what does our friendship have to do with me not being a part of this church anymore? And they just couldn't accept. They automatically assumed that once I left, I was in sin. I was doing things that I wasn't supposed to be doing. I started dating a guy who would he's now my husband. I started dating my husband at this point because they wouldn't even let us date. That's its own story. But yeah, so they automatically assumed that I was sleeping with him, that I was completely in sin, doing all these things that I wasn't supposed to. And it just like drove me mad because I was like, really? Like, you don't even know my life. And I cared about what people think. I'm gonna lie. I'm one of those people who's like, oh, like, they're gonna think this of me and they're judging me. And I totally shouldn't think that. And I've come so far in not thinking that anymore. But yeah, it was just kind of this, like, majority of them just cut me off, didn't really talk to me. Some try to reach out to me after the fact, in hopes to get me back, like just kind of asking how I was doing with life, what I was up to, and whatnot. I met up with a couple of girls after, and just to give them all answers because they all wanted answers to why I left and everything. And I mean, not that I even owed them answers because they didn't even really stay my friend after that. But I'm thinking back now, and really none of those people are my friends anymore. I mean, I'll see them because when I lived in that city, I would pass by them once or twice, and it was just kind of this like awkward situation. But
Right.
I can't really say. The only person I'm really friends with there is my sister because she's still in that church. But that's pretty much it.
That is so messed up on so many levels. How those girls had the nerve to tell you not to get them a gift so you could save your money to move out.
Yes. Oh, that hurt me so much. I was like, what, you think I'm like broke or something? Like, I need your help. It was really hard.
I could only imagine. I would feel extremely hurt by that because there's just no sympathy. There's no compassion there. I mean, not saying that they have to pity you because you didn't do anything wrong, but
Yeah.
I mean, you would think that being roommates and friends and having a bond, you would think that they would be a little more loving, especially since they're supposed to be Christian. And the funny thing is, my friend, well, I thought she was my friend, and she was also my discipler. She said the same exact things to me. She said, I put so much work and time into you, and that threw me off.
Yeah, that's pretty much how it goes. I mean, I can recall when I would see other people leave, and it was just like this. I was like so curious too, and other people were like, "Wait, why did they leave? Like, let's still be their friend. Let's hang out with them. Let's get them to come back." I was always the person trying to get people to come back, which I totally regret now because I'm like, "Oh, I'm glad none of them listen to me." But
Yeah.
but yeah, I was always curious. I'm like, "Why don't we hang out?" They're like, "Oh no, they're not doing well. Like, we need to cut them off." And I was like, "What? Like, those aren't real friendships." Like, I'm friends with so many people who have left, and left because, you know, they didn't want to follow Jesus, and left because we were crazy. And so,
Yeah.
like, for many different, and I'm still friends with them, and I don't judge them. They're living their own life. I've had to like learn that you can bring a horse to water, but you can't make it drink. And I feel like we were constantly trying to drown people.
Mm-hmm.
And it was just like, it's not how you build real disciples. And then the outcome is you got people who leave and they don't even know who God is, because God was just this person you forced on them, essentially.
Right. Yeah, I agree with that. That's something that bothers me a lot too, even though I'm no longer a part of the faith.
Yeah.
I it bothers me so much when I speak to people who leave that church and say, "That's it. I don't want to be a Christian anymore. I don't believe in God. I'm becoming an atheist. I don't think I want to have anything to do with religion." Because it took me leaving and 2 years later finally attending a new church that was total opposite of the ICOC, very laid back, accepts you as you are for the person you are, and they're open. It's not like you have to open up to all these people because they're holier than you and you need to learn from them. Everyone in this church all can relate to each other, including the pastor. And it took for me to join that church. I mean, I didn't have to do anything special to become a member. I just started going and they're like, "You're automatically a member." I was like, "Okay, cool." When I finally got to see how different this church was and how they were so loving towards me, and all of the hurt and the depression that I had to go through after leaving the ICOC, that was when I realized at that moment, it's not God, it's the church, it's the people. It has nothing to do with religion, nothing to do with God. And so a lot of people think that I left religion because of my experience in the ICOC. Really, my experience in the ICOC kind of led a path, but it didn't, it has nothing to do with me leaving Christianity and not believing in certain things anymore. That was all on me. So it just, anytime I talk to people and they say to me, "I don't believe in God anymore, or I'm not a Christian anymore," because of the ICOC, I always have to try and help to correct that for them. So I'm glad that you knew that and you're able to say that now, so people can hear this and they can think with a clear mind instead of thinking off of emotions and making decisions off of their own personal emotions of whatever trauma they've had to go through with this church. Because some people go through a lot more than others, and some people it's like, "Yeah, it's nothing. I was there and I left and I don't care." I love the fact that your parents left. I had no idea. So your parents left 6 months before you left?
Yes. So that's a real interesting story that I would love to share.
Yes, I'm dying to hear
So
that one.
it's a really cool story. I mean, I believe God brought my parents to the ICOC to learn how to have a general understanding of how to study the Bible. Eventually, they start, in my opinion, I feel like they repeat their sermons yearly, because I feel like after I returned once after I left and I heard a sermon, I'm like, I swear I've heard that like 7,000 times now. But so they were really good at teaching my parents how to read the Bible, how to study the Bible. And my parents, in their little house church, my dad became actually one of the preachers, one of the leaders in the house church. He was always doing the sermons, always writing the sermons. But for many, many years, he would write a sermon. He would kind of get it looked over kind of thing. Or it was always reviewed and questioned and everything, make sure, it's with what their doctrine says. He never stepped on anyone's toes, was just doing all those basic scriptures. He read all of the books that the ICOC had to offer. He wrote sermons off of other people's, opinions and ideas. And one day, two current ex-members got in touch with my parents and started studying the Old Testament, essentially, and learning more about the law. And my dad's like, wow, this is so cool. Like, I want to teach this to my people. And I want to show them, like, it's God's word. There's nothing else to this but the fact that it's God's word. So I'm going to share it. There should be no problems, right? Because the ICOC claims that they follow the whole Bible. So if I'm preaching the whole Bible, it's all good. So he does, I think, one, maybe two sermons as an ICOC member. And one member was very much against that idea. He heard the lesson. He started feeling like it was against the doctrine. He literally, like, I call him Judas. It's really bad. But he ratted out my dad, essentially, and told him, hey, like, he's not preaching what, he's supposed to be preaching. And, this is right. And so they got a hold of my dad, and they're like, hey, what you preaching there, boy? Mm-hmm. And he's like, oh, well, like, let me show it to you. So he sends it. I'm like, well, that's not technically wrong because it's the Bible and everything you're saying is coming from the Bible. They're like, but here's the sermon on this topic. You should just preach on this topic. We don't want to step on anyone's toes. And my dad's like, yeah, no, like, I want to preach about this. Like, why can't I preach about this? And and I can respect, you have a church, they got their rules or whatever, their beliefs and stuff. But my parents started to see that it was the ICOC's doctrine that he was following, and it was slowly not God's doctrine and the Bible's doctrine. And eventually, like, him and my mom together did a lot of, like, praying, talking, and deciding, what they were going to do. And one day they just decided to leave. They didn't make too big of a stink of it. They wouldn't personally say that they got a lot of heat as members, as much as I think younger people do, like me. But they, weren't going to argue and step on anyone's toes and fake what they, didn't want to preach. So they left, and they told me all about it, like a whole story from beginning to end. They told me when they left. It kind of hurt, but it was almost like fuel. Like, I was like, wow, my parents left. My parents, aren't, fully integrated into this church. They aren't married to the church. And so I was like, maybe that's a sign. Maybe, I should leave. And so when my parents left and everything, oh my gosh, so many great things have happened since my parents left. My parents' marriage has just completely flourished since leaving. They've gone to counseling that wasn't, recommended by the church anymore. A lot of different things happened. It was crazy. And I was like, wow, if that's not from God, seeing my parents' marriage just totally do a 180, and their love for each other is something, like, I just can't even put into words. I'm like, if that's not from God, like, that, I don't know what God I'm following. And that was a big deal to me. I was like, wow, like, they're following the whole word of God, and they're doing so great at it. And so I started questioning everything that they were teaching. That's kind of where I started getting my doubts and stuff, was I was just questioning things. I was like, well, why don't we study this? Why don't we read about this? And I was very much shut down a lot for wanting to study outside of anything that had to do with fixing myself. And that was a big deal to me, like, just knowing that I always had to fix myself.
Right.
I was very much irritated with that. I was like, that is not, I don't think that's God. Like, I don't think we're supposed to obsess over every little thing that we do.
That's really good. I'm so happy that your parents left, and that's like a lucky situation to be in, because not too many people have that happen where their parents leave and it just inspires them to leave. It's kind of like the okay signal for you that it's safe, it's okay, I can let this go. If my parents did it and they're still fine and they're doing even better, then I could do it and I'll be fine and I'm not doing anything wrong. And
yes, for sure.
Yeah, that's great having that kind of support when you have your own family leave. I mean, I think about the people that are a part of this church and other cults, and they have family that remain, and like you said, they're married to the church, and they completely shun their own child because of the fact that they decided to leave. So for your parents to leave, I'm excited about that. Every time I hear people leave. And they were members for a long time, right?
Yeah, they were 18 years, I believe,
Oh
18,
my
20
gosh.
years. Yeah, well, I mean, longer than me. And they've seen a lot of the waves of where the ICOC's been in the last 2 decades. And so I mean, they know everything. It's funny, people will like try and still question what they believe. And my dad's like, I already know. Like, I was in that church for 20 years. You don't think I know all those answers
Yeah.
and all the scripted answers and everything? And which I think is just super cool because I feel like I can really learn something new and different with my parents. I mean, my husband's parents are still in the church, and that's its own, you know, I guess roller coaster of emotions and whatnot. It's not, yeah, I can see both sides. So I feel like I'm really lucky. And then, I'm kind of sad for him because it's definitely, you're treated a certain way. I mean, they're not at all like the worst that I think some parents can be. But it's definitely, there's like a ridge there, it's like, you just know, you're like, oh, well, we don't believe the same thing kind of
Right.
mentality.
Did you meet your husband in the church?
Yes, I did actually. We met the first day I moved to that city actually, and he'll tell you very much that we were not friends. When
Yeah.
we first met, he helped me move my couch into the apartment, but I was very snobby and full of myself, and he's like, oh, this girl is dumb and I don't want to be near her. But we got to know each other over the 4 years that I was there, and it was it was those last 6 months after my parents left. A lot of things were happening in my life, and we got a lot closer at that time too, and we left together.
Nice. So how was that with your husband leaving with you? Did you tell him that you wanted to leave and he said, cool, I'll go with it? Or was it a challenge, or was he the one who wanted to leave first?
So actually, no, I don't think he even intended to leave until I actually left. But the whole thing with us dating in the church was a huge issue. It went on for like 2 months before I left. So the 2 months before I left, I started realizing that I liked him more than just a friend. Like for the longest time, like I always thought he was cute, but we were just friends. And there's so many other girls that like this boy. So I was like, I don't want to be one of those girls who likes, the guy that they all like and whatnot. So I was like, no, I'm not gonna like him. He's just pretty looking. That's it.
Mhm.
And so then, but we were like best friends. I mean, he knew everything about my life. He knew the things that I didn't even tell my discipler. I mean, they weren't bad things, but it was like just about like growing up, who I was at my core, like all these things. So we started getting closer and closer, and I was like, oh my gosh, I don't want to, develop feelings. I'm gonna get the wrath of God on me from this church if I start liking this boy, because I'd liked other boys since I was a disciple, and they've all clashed, failed. Every one of those guys have left the church for one reason or the next. So I was like, I don't want him to leave the church, so
Hmm.
probably shouldn't do this. But I couldn't honestly tell you. I don't know if maybe my sister said something to someone, but somebody got wind of my interest, like they call it. And the like lead campus woman was questioning me. She would come up to me, it felt like every day, and ask me, she was like, so, like, do you like him? No. Okay. And like the next day, so like, you guys are hanging out a lot. What's that all about? Like, questioning everything that we did together, what we were up to. The eyes were all honest, it felt like. And it was up until the last week, it was building and building and building. And I was just denying that I even liked him because I was like, I'm not going to do this. Like, this is crazy. So the last week I was like, okay, fine. I like him. And I was like, what's so bad about liking him? And I just started fighting back essentially. And they're like, well, you need to like not like him. And, he has some work to do. I remember they slandered him so hard. Like, it breaks my heart because I'm like, how far are you willing to go just for me to not date this boy?
Right.
And so they were like, yeah, he has a lot of work to do. He's hurt other girls and he needs to repent of that. And they were like, he's like a wolf in sheepskin. And I was like, oh, so he was a leader too in the campus ministry. I was like, so the leaders are wolves in sheepskin? Like, we're not going to like kick him out for that? Like, it didn't make any sense. I was like, why are you saying all these horrible things about him? And you're letting him continue to be in the position he is in the church. You're not talking. They weren't even talking to him. I called him every day for a week. And I'm like, hey, did anyone say anything to you? Are they talking to you? He's like, no one's saying anything to me. Like, no one doesn't, like, they don't say anything. But me, I was being attacked. Like, I had
Mm.
3 different women this girl brought over into a coffee shop that I will never, ever step foot in again, because that's all I can think about now. But she would bring them in, and they were just random girls. They weren't his closest friends. They didn't know him at all. And they were like, yeah, my other friend so-and-so, she liked him, broke her heart, yada, yada. And they're like, you just need to back off. And I'm like, no. Like, I just kept saying no. I was like, this is a good talk, but I'm going to think about it. And, my thought was no. And then finally, she gave me an ultimatum, was like, you need to either stop talking to him completely, don't hang out with him, nothing, or like, we're going to have some problems, pretty much. Like, it was almost like I felt like they were going to kick me out if I stopped talking to him. And I mean, I don't know what anyone else can say, but he was my best friend. And I was just tired of people controlling my life, and especially wanting to take the only person that knew me the most outside of my family, like, that got me, that understood me, that didn't fall into, the church's mind washing, however you say it, brainwashing,
Mm.
and just did his own thing and was very confident in himself. And I was like, why are you going to take that away from me? And finally, I just decided that enough was enough. So I was like, well, I guess, I'm going to have to leave. I called my parents. I'm like, hey, yeah, I'm going to leave. And they knew all about it. I called them every day. I told them everything that was happening. They were so like just mind blown. They couldn't say anything because they weren't in the church anymore. So it's not like they could come up and be like, hey, why are you harassing my daughter? And so I was like, well, I guess I just have to leave. And I texted my husband. I was like, hey, I'm leaving tonight, so have fun. And he was like, oh, okay, yeah. Like, he didn't even question or anything. But the day after I left, then they started talking to him, because we started dating, because I'm like, well, I'm not in the church. They can't tell me what to do. So, like, what are we gonna do? So he's like, yeah, you want to be my girlfriend? And so we started dating, and then they pulled him aside, and they're like, yeah, so are you really gonna date someone who doesn't belong to your church? And are you gonna be with someone who isn't equally yoked, to God and everything? Like, she's a non-believer. And he's like, okay, show me in the Bible where she's a non-believer just because she doesn't go to our church. And they had all these like cherry picked scriptures, and he knew they were cherry picked. He was like, this doesn't make any sense. I don't think you're proving yourself. And he was like, well, if you're going to just, continue to do to me what you did to her for her to leave, then I'm just going to save you the trouble and just leave. And so he messaged me like the next day and was like, well, I guess I've left too. And I
Wow.
was like, oh, dang, that's crazy. But I was like, okay, cool. And I laughed. I remember all of my roommates, I came home that night, and they're all staring at me with this death stare. And they're like, so did you hear that Pat left? And I was like, oh my gosh, no. And I just went in my room and laughed. And I know that was like super evil when I think about it now, but I'm like, that's funny. Like, it doesn't bother me. It really doesn't bother me. Because, I mean, I don't think I would have wanted him to stay there. I thought it was really horrible, the way that especially I was treated individually. I guess I hated the most that I was so horribly treated, and I felt like I was attacked, and he wasn't treated like anything until after I left.
Right. I'm so happy that you guys ended up getting married, because you got married a while after he left, correct?
Yes. So it wasn't too, oh my gosh, we didn't date that very long, but we know each other. So, we dated for, I think, 5, 6 months, and then we got engaged. And around all that time and everything, we had joined another church, the most amazing church ever, in my opinion. A lot like how you were describing that other church, where it was like, this is what it really looks like to be like in the house of God. This is what it looks like to have real friends. And
Right.
so we had joined another church together. We got engaged, and then we got married, I think 4 months after that. And yeah, it's just been smooth sailing since. And to top it off, the guys that were supposedly his friends, they were so upset over him leaving, me leaving, us dating in the end, and getting married, that he thought they were his friends, and they said they couldn't be in his wedding because they didn't approve of his marriage.
That's so sad. So
It is so
pathetic.
sad. Yeah, it was really,
Ridiculous.
really rough.
I'm very happy that you guys made it through and you both left and your parents left and that you guys are doing well together and that you didn't allow what you went through or any of the doctrine that they fed to you, that you didn't allow any of that experience to ruin all of the beauty that could come from your life, which is what you have now, because that is something that a lot of people have a hard time letting go of. They have a hard time letting go of their experience from the ICOC, no matter how long ago or how recent it was. When they leave, they don't really know how to enjoy life, and there's so much beauty to life, and there's many beautiful people you can meet, and I just feel like a lot of times people get so caught up and wrapped up in this church that they don't realize there's so much to life. And once I had realized that, it made it so much easier for me to just accept and to just say, okay, I'm good to go. So I'm so happy that everything turns out really well for you. Where would you say you are now when it comes to your belief, your faith, spirituality? Where do you stand with that?
It's a really weird middle. I just actually started journaling about it because I feel like I'm almost on the fence. It's funny when they did that light and dark study. They're like, "Where are you at?" I'm like, "Well, I think I'm on the fence." They're like, "Yeah, no, you're in the dark." But just think, yeah, that's what I think of. I'm like, "Oh my gosh, I'm on the fence." But I started studying out Christianity in general, and with my parents' help and all of their knowledge, and literally just the Bible. I don't know. I couldn't really stand with Christianity. Christianity doesn't follow the whole Bible. It has a lot to do with like the laws, I guess, of the Old Testament. That's something that I feel like is still accurate to this day, if it applies to you. But yeah, a lot of Christians don't stand on that stone, and so when I realized that it's just that's not the thing, but they believe in Jesus, which is something I do believe in. It was really hard for me. I was like, I don't really know if I can consider myself a Christian. And so I really guess I don't have a label. A lot of people call it a messianic Jew because my family is Jewish as well. So we have a lot of Jewish things that we do, so to speak. But I feel like, honestly, I believe what the Bible teaches. I believe that Jesus is the Messiah. And I'm still learning about it to this day. I don't even go to a church because I've moved to a different state recently, but I'm not even affected because I'm like, nah, if I'm meant to be somewhere, I'll be somewhere. But I'm not trying to force that on myself. My husband doesn't force that on us either. And we're just kind of taking it as it goes, really. It's been really freeing to not feel like I have to be at a church or I'm going to go to hell or I have to be somewhere on Sunday, which isn't even biblical. And so it's just been really cool because right now I just feel like I'm just with God and I'm living and I'm learning as I go. But I wouldn't categorize myself in a specific faith, so to speak.
What would you tell people, a piece of advice for those who are thinking about leaving the church, especially those who were brought up in the kingdom as kingdom kids as you were?
Oh man, there's so much. I mean, it's really hard, if you're still a child, if you're still a teenager. Definitely do your research. I totally support just studying your Bible. You really want to know like true doctrine, like read the whole thing. But if you're in college and you want to leave, it's hard. It really is hard because you are put in a position where you're living with other people. You're kind of dependent on that, how much it costs to live with 4 people as opposed to by yourself. It's a lot cheaper. And they kind of almost make church your life, so you're not really focused on your finances as much as you probably could be. So I would definitely say focus on your finances if you're trying to get out of there, and that's definitely a thing that's going to affect it. And reach out to people outside. If your family's not in it, be open with them, even if you think they're going to judge you because you have to admit that you're in a cult. Be open with them. If your family's in the church, I mean, there's so many people. You got Tina here. You got me. I'm totally willing to help anyone. But definitely reach out. Don't be afraid. Like, there's so many different things I could say to help leave. But if you got that gut feeling to leave, please, please just leave, because it's just ultimately you can't allow people to control your faith, and you can't allow them to, like, when you get up to God, I don't truly believe they're going to be like, well, so-and-so, did you disciple her enough so that she didn't go and sin in this way? No, you're going to be standing there by yourself. And ultimately, it's your decisions. So in the same way, this is your decision, whether they've told you it is or not. And I truly believe that if you pray about it, because I know praying about it is a big deal. You pray about it. I really think God is going to pull you through.
Right. That is perfect advice for anyone to take and to make sure that they follow. So for those of you listening, make sure that you really learn how to just follow your intuition, follow that gut feeling. And
Yes.
if your gut is telling you something is wrong, something is off, then maybe you should dig a little deeper and see what that is, see what that's about. Just as Katie did, just as I did. Everyone's path is different. Everyone's destination and journey is different once they leave a cult. But the first step is to leave. So I want to thank you, Katie, for doing this podcast with us today and for sharing your story and being such an open book. It was so nice to have you share your story, and I'm sure your story is going to help so many people. So I'm super excited about that.
Oh, thank you so much.
For those of you who are interested and you would like to share your own personal story, you can just send me an email, or you can reach out to me on Facebook or Instagram. All that information is down below in the description box. I also have my 12-week coaching program down below, which is on my website. I also do individual coaching sessions, which you will also find down below. Make sure that you tune in every week for weekly videos. Thank you so much for listening. I love you guys all so much, and I'll see you in the next video.